Next on our agenda is item number 11. I'll make sure I unvote myself here. There we go. Bam. We have, it's an actual item, waivers of Start Smart Utah Year 1 implementation and R277-723. Director of Public Affairs, Jeff Van Holten, are you taking point on this?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Okay, do you want to introduce others then?
Sure. Jeff Van Holten, Director of Public Affairs for the board. Glad to be here today. And I wanted to quickly just mention, we do have some staff members that have been joining in for items later on the agenda, and I just want to let those staff members know that we're significantly behind. So if there's other things you want to go do, feel free. You might want to text a friend who's staying in the meeting to let you know when it's closer to your item. In lieu of that, I do want to be very brief with this. What we are asking you, and Director Kathleen Britton is on the line as well to answer any questions regarding this particular waiver. As you may recall, House Bill 222 in the legislative session created the Start Smart Utah Breakfast Program that requires schools to phase in serving breakfast after the bell has rung based on their student population count that is enrolled in free and reduced lunch. This is year 1 of the implementation, so schools that have 70% student population on free and reduced lunch or higher are required to implement by the end of the school year breakfast after the bell. Due to COVID-19, this has created a lot of logistical hardships. We have a lot of lunch staff because they work in small quarters next to one another, that once one gets COVID, they're all exposed, they all have to quarantine. And so running lunch programs in and of themselves normally is becoming very difficult, let alone adding on a new breakfast program. So the board in that legislation is allowed to waive the implementation requirement as laid out in their board rule. The process we put in the board rule is a little more robust and complicated for a year that doesn't involve COVID-19. So we're asking you in this to do 2 things. Waive the process you put out in your board rule for how to seek a waiver from implementation, and then grant the actual implementation waiver for all of the LEAs that have signed on to the waiver letter that was produced by the Child Nutrition Program. This waiver would be in effect only for the implementation of this year. So LEAs next year will be required to implement year 1 and 2 in the same year. So just keep in mind, you might see down the road another waiver request if that becomes untenable for some LEAs. But that is what we're requesting, and I'll just stop there and leave it to questions or wait for a motion.
Do we have a motion or questions on this? There is a draft motion that's been prepared that includes those 2 pieces. There's an and in the middle of it.
Board Member Cannon, I'm happy to make a motion. I move that the board approve the waiver of the year 1 implementation requirements of the Start Smart Utah Breakfast Program for the LEAs listed on the waiver request document, and also waive the process outlined in R277-723-3 for this request only.
I'll second that. This is Board Member Marsh.
Thank you, Board Member Marsh. Do you want to speak to the motion, Board Member Cannon?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
Jeff did a great job.
Discussion to the motion, Board Member Lear.
I had a question for Jeff, probably. Is there money attached to this, and would LEAs then forego that money, or is there no money, or what would happen?
So the short answer is there was no money attached to the legislation, but this is a federal funded program that is given on a reimbursement basis per meal served. So they would increase their funding if they had more students participate, but they wouldn't necessarily lose funding.
Okay, helpful. Thank you.
Board Member Earl.
My question is, there are a lot of people opting out of this. Are there any schools that are actually staying in the program? That's question 1. And then the other is just There's a lot then, I guess. I don't know. It looked like a lot opting out. Then my other is just a comment that I'm not sure why we were in the business of pushing this in the first place. This should be a district thing, not a law or a policy, but a district thing.
Jeff, do you want to answer the question?
Yes, the question is yes, and Director Kathleen Britton might have more details on how many, but we do have several that did not opt out, that they had already started and they're moving forward with it. But there was a significant amount that had some issues with implementing due to COVID-19. And Kathleen, I don't know if you have those numbers on hand.
Chair Huntsman, may I speak?
Kathleen Britton? Yeah.
Okay. I do not have the numbers on hand, but there was quite a few that have already started implementing. Several directors signed the letter for the waiver, even if they've been implementing it, just to support their fellow directors. So there may look like there's a lot more than that want it because they were trying to support directors that need it. There's been a really big hardship at the school districts right now with staffing and trying to meet all the demands of online learning, in-person learning, schools closing, and just making sure that students are fed, that they have asked for our support in helping them not have to implement another type of program at this point. They are in favor of implementing it normally. They have mentioned to me, they just have said that just due to everything that's happening right now, it is too much.
Can I
You have
ask
a
another
follow-up?
question? Yeah. So are you saying that they signed the letter even though they aren't waiving the requirements? Is that just in case they need to waive the requirements so they can't meet regulations, or they're just signed them because other people signed it? Is there a clarification there?
Yes, they signed it to give support for other directors. So for instance, a charter school that's already implementing this process in their school has said they would like to sign it so that it looks like they have a lot more support to the board to get this approved.
Okay. Board Member Lear, your hand's still raised. Was that from before or?
Just getting lazy, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I just wanted, Board Member Davis?
I guess I'm just assuming or asking if they signed it for others and they were a charter who is already implementing, but say they are hit with a big quarantine in their cafeteria staff or something of that nature, they would still be covered under this waiver at any point in this year should they need it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Jeff answered a yes. Okay. Did you have a follow-up, Board Member Davis?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. The motion before the board is that the board approve the waiver of the year one implementation requirement of the Start Smart Utah Breakfast Program for the LEAs listed on the waiver request document, and also waive the process outlined in R277-723-3 for this request only. All those in favor of the proposed motion, please vote. Appears the voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Under 11.2, it's an actionable item on a board rule waiver request. Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings, are you ready to address this one? This is a proposed action.
Yes, I'd be happy to, Chair. Thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy, and this agenda item is open for staff or board members to propose waivers to board rules. This month, there are no requests from staff, but I do believe Board Member Belknap has a motion. I'll just give a little bit of background just to remind the board that the motion that she's about to make is very similar to a motion that the board made back in May for the 1920 school year. What it does is it would waive the accreditation or re-accreditation or renewal process for schools who'd be required to do that during the 2021 school year and gives them an extra year of time. And then for the second portion of the motion relates to students who are enrolled in a school who is in a school that's in their first year of operation, either the 1920 school year or this year, to allow their credit to be considered credit as if the school was accredited. So that's kind of the background to just remind you that the board did take action on very similar waiver in the 1920 school year. I think Board Member Belknap may have additional information she wants to share, or I'm happy to answer questions.
So if Board Member Belknap would like to put her motion forward, then she could speak to the motion and the justification behind it. So Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. That's what I was planning to do. I move that the board, for the school year renewing the school's accreditation for a school in its first or second year of operation during the 2021 school year, waives the requirement in section R277-410-3 for the school year to obtain accreditation from a regional accrediting body and allowing the school an additional year to obtain accreditation. And number 2, for the student enrolled in a school in the school's first year of operation during the 1920 or the 2021 school year, waives the requirements of subsection R277-10-3 subsection 2 and deems credit granted from a non-accredited school during the 1920 and the 2021 school year as a credit earned from an accredited source.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Board Member Marsh.
Thank you, Board Member Marsh. Board Member Belknap, do you want to speak to your motion?
I do, just a little bit. I brought this forward because several schools had called and said how difficult this is becoming to try and get teams together, to try and get parent groups together, try and get the principal out of the classroom who's teaching because they can't get substitutes to try and get this accreditation done. They're already accredited schools, and they were hoping that maybe there would be a possibility that they could get one additional year so that they don't have to do this in the time of COVID. That'll be enough for now, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion to the proposed motion? Board Member Lear.
This is to Laura. Do you mind saying which schools they were that approached you and requested this?
Maybe not, but I will tell you that there were schools up north and schools down south. So there were 4 of them that called me specifically on this, and then 1 school district.
Okay, thank you.
But those schools were in the same school district that person called me from the district.
So there were charters and districts?
There was 1 charter.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe a question might be for staff, if they can come back, of how many schools do we have presently at risk that are in the accreditation?
We actually have 12, Chair Huntsman. We have 6 from last year and 6 from this year, so we have 12.
Okay.
Chair Huntsman, I just wanted to mention, and maybe I apologize, Board Member Belknap. I was going to say, if at one point I had heard approximately a quarter of our schools could be undergoing the process, but it sounds like Board Member Belknap might.
Well, when they told me that, so maybe I'm wrong, Angie, because my understanding was that, but maybe it was 6 last year and then it's a quarter of them this year. So I could be off, Chair Huntsman. I apologize. Thanks, Angie.
Okay, Board Member Earl. Oh, Jennifer Thronson, do you have a response to that?
Yes, so with the motion on the table, it is not only the new schools from last year and this year, which is the 6th and 6th, but it's also any school up for renewal, which is approximately about 1/5 of our schools in secondary.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and maybe this is more of a logistics things. How does that work? Is it just postponed? They're midway through trying to get it done and they just start up again next year? Or do they continue at a slower pace? I guess I'm trying to think logistically how that's best, how we best meet the needs there. They just stop what they're doing till the fall of next year?
According to this, the motion, it basically adds an additional year to their accreditation process.
So it just allows them to add one more year if they need it. If they don't need it, so could they finish out the accreditation this year? I guess that's what I'm thinking. If they're able to do it.
In the event they can't,
Yeah.
then they're required to add another year. That's the way this motion is stated, but that's how I read it.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah.
I believe, Chair Huntsman, that is the way it would happen. And Board Member Earl, that if a school wanted to move forward and could get it done this year, that they could still do that. They're not required to wait a year.
Okay.
Thank you. Clarification in my mind.
Jennifer Swanson, your hand's still raised?
My mistake. I'm putting it down. Everything that's said is true.
Some of us like to keep our hand up, don't we? Board Member Hanson?
Thanks, Chair. I'm not generally a big fan of waivers, and I think that we are still delivering education, but I think that accreditation could be really a nightmare trying to do it in this environment. So I'll speak in favor of this motion to give them the extra year.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Hanson. I'm not seeing any other hand raised. I'll get through this. I can't wait to have a break to get a drink of water here. The motion before the board is number one, for a school renewing the school's accreditation or a school in its first or second year of operation during the 2020-21 school year, waives the requirement in section R277-410-3 for the school to obtain accreditation from a regional accrediting body and allow the school an additional year to obtain accreditation. And number two, for a student enrolled in a school in the school's first year of operation during the 2019-20 or the 2020-21 school year, waives the requirements of subsection R277-410-3 subsection 2 and deems credit granted from a non-accredited school during the 2019 through 20 and the 2020 through 21 school year as credit earned from an accredited source. That's a motion before the board. Board members, please vote. The voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving right along, it's 3:53. Let's take a short break and we'll come right back on at 4 o'clock.